Good afternoon again, guys. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome again today, May 25th. This is today's edition of The Law and You. I am your host, attorney at law, Shellon Washington, licensed in the state of New York. I'm also licensed in Guyana, my home country, and in Trinidad and Tobago. It's a pleasure to be here again this afternoon, guys, to bring you some more legal issues that might be affecting you, or you may know someone who this may be affecting. We will be discussing asset protection during or before or during divorce proceedings. We're going to go through some of the ways you can protect your asset. I've done videos before explaining to you some of the ways you can protect your asset even before. And today we're going to go through some of the ways you can protect your asset if you filed a divorce prior to taking steps to protecting your assets. One of the things I discussed last week, and if you were listening to this video but you haven't listened to the one last week, I encourage you to go back and listen to the video last week. So today we're going to discuss how do you even protect your assets if you're already in divorce. And I alluded to this last week when I told you guys one of the things in a divorce proceedings is the issue of the presumption that the asset is marital. There's a presumption that all assets that you're dealing with in a divorce are considered marital, except for those assets which you have pre-acquired before getting into the marriage. And I've also mentioned that if you have pre-marital assets, the way you could prevent those assets from becoming part of the marital assets is make sure once you marry, you do not pool your resources. You cannot afford to pool your resources with that of the person that you're married to if you have premarital assets. For instance, if you gain some form of assets in an inheritance, let's say your parent died and they left you assets. Those assets are non-marital assets. Inheritance are not considered marital. Any proceeds from a personal injury claim is non-marital asset. That's considered non-marital assets. And also certain disability not retirement benefit, but there are certain disability assets or payments which are also considered non-marital assets. So one of the ways I said before in previous last week's video to prevent your asset from being considered marital, your pre-marital asset or your pre-acquired asset, which you acquired prior to marriage, is to not use any of your marital funds into that property, whatever the asset is. So if it's an investment asset, make sure once you get married, you're not taking your income from your source of employment and putting it into that asset. You're not if it's a house, make sure you're not repairing the house with your marital income. Or if it's a investment, let's say you've invested into a stock or bond, just ensure that the money you continue to put in that stock or bond or whatever type of investment it is, make sure it's not coming from marital work-related income. You can get it from a property that you had before you marry, and the property is bringing in a rental income. You could take money from that rental income and you could put it into that whatever other investment that you might have. Thereby, you're keeping that asset distinct and separate from any other asset that you may acquire during the marriage. Now, during the marriage itself, as you acquire assets during the marriage, like I said, there's the presumption that it's marital. And one of the ways you could rebut the presumption is by showing that there was never any commingling of assets between the parties. So I discussed last week that if the spouse actually lived separate lives, They never had a joint account. They never put their resources together. And that would be a prime example of a way of which the parties could be in a marital relationship, but they're keeping their assets separate. So, in essence, they're billing a defense to rebut the presumption that any asset that they acquired during that marriage, that it's marital, because they're rebutting the presumption by keeping their assets separate and distinct. And for some of those people out there, if you're thinking by not having a joint account with your spouse, by not pooling your resources together, if you're thinking, okay, I am helping out by keeping my stuff to myself and I'm increasing my net worth, and if anything should happen, I'm going to get 50-50. It doesn't work like that, because if you keep everything separate and distinct, you're billing the presumption that the asset was neither not marital, or if you're entitled to anything at all, you'll just get whatever the percentage is that you actually put in. And I want people to understand that paying assisting by putting a certain amount of money into the home, that doesn't really count as you rebutting that, as you going with the presumption to say, well, it's marital asset. Because the issue is, let's say a wife and a husband is living together. Let's say the husband is working very tirelessly. He takes all of his income, he puts it into the house, he pays the mortgage, he pays all of the expenses, he pays for the children to go to school, whatever they need, he provide, he buys food for the house. And let's say the wife, on the other hand, she doesn't do much, but what she does is she has a job where her income is not that far off from being self-supporting. She's very self-supporting. She can take care of herself. But what she does with her income is spending on things that she likes for herself. She never invests it into the home. She never does anything for the family, but she takes care of herself exclusively. And if there's a toilet that's broken in the house, she never cares. She never fixed it. If the air conditioning is broken in the house, she never cares. She never fixed it. Guess what? In a divorce proceeding, the husband could argue that most of his asset, most of his income went towards taking care of the household, and that he's the one who invested almost exclusively into the marital residence. So in a divorce proceeding, the wife is likely to walk away with nothing, because what she did, she took her money and she took care of herself. She invested into herself. She paid off her pension. She did whatever she had to do. So when she walks, she probably will be walking with the clothing on her back. And maybe, if anything, a very small percentage of what the value of the marital assets are, but she will not be walking with much. And as you guys know, this happens most frequently in households, but it's the reverse. I've used the wife as the example of the party who's investing little or nothing into the marriage, but it's most cases it's reverse. And there are limited cases where it's the husband, because I have had cases in the past where the husband is the one investing wholly and solely into the marital residence. He put all that he had, take care of his children, make sure there was food, make sure the house was cared for, the light bills were paid, the gas bill was paid, his car note, car insurance, everything. And the husband and the husband usually is the one who takes all of his money, spends it on the outside, with run chasing after women, going to clubs, doing things that is not essential to upgrading his household. And in that case, where a husband never invested into his household, he never put anything to ensure that wherever he was living was the castle for him and the family, guess what? He's going to walk with the shirt on his back that he entered that marriage with, and maybe 5% of the asset, or maybe nothing. There are instances where the husband abandoned the household and he never really contributed anything. But again, when you're dealing with assets in a marriage, you need a skilled attorney. Because if you don't have a skilled attorney who understands the law and understands how to maneuver the provisions that the law has made to provide defenses to help the spouse who has labored a lot, who has invested a lot, who's put their all into the property, then chances are that spouse could end up not getting what they're entitled to. That's why it's important to get the right attorney who understands that the issue of marital asset is just a presumption and it's not written in stone, guys. So if you're trying to divorce, don't think, okay, because the law says if I acquire something during a marriage, it's marital asset. So therefore, I'm just gonna just walk away and allow it to go the way it's supposed to, or the way I think, or the way the judge. Not even the judge knows the law sometimes. Sometimes it's a skilled attorney who helps to guide the judges and to show them the right direction, show them the way. Because a lot of judges, believe it or not, guys, a lot of judges are themselves ignorant of the law. I've had a situation where one of my clients, I'm representing the man, I'm representing the husband, and there's the wife, and the party has limited assets. But the wife wants to punish my client because she claimed that he was unfaithful during the marriage. And, in situations like that, the judge ought to know that in the state of New York, bad behavior, bad conduct, infidelity is not relevant when it comes to a no fault divorce. And a lot of the judges, well, not a lot, but some judges are ignorant of the fact that bad behavior does not goes towards equitable division of marital assets. No one cares when it comes to if somebody was unfaithful, they engage in adultery. Those factors are no longer important. It was only important when there was divorce based on certain grounds like adultery, cruelty, abandonment. When under the previous law, where there was nothing like no fault. Nobody knew what a no fault was. But because there was a change in the law, so now we're able to go to the court. Anybody's able to approach the court, whether or not there's fault, whether or not both parties were faithful during the marriage. If somebody abandoned the household, it doesn't matter. You will be able to get your divorce. But the issue is, how do I save my assets? And you want to save your assets if you are engaged in a marriage that was really bad and the party was never really good to you. They never really loved you. They just used you. There are a lot of instances where, believe it or not, people get married just for the sole purpose of using someone. And it happens a lot. People like to be comfortable. Everybody likes to have wealth, money. And a lot of times I've seen it happen so many times. Once I saw, he wasn't typically a client of mine. His wife was a client of mine. The wife was barely 23 years old and the husband was at the time about 36 years old, and he married this young woman. He wanted a child, but she saw something else in him. She saw dollar signs. He saw the possibility of having a child with a younger woman, but she saw the possibility of getting money, and he did had that. He was a CEO for one of those big name banks, and he was working for a lot of money. So what he did in the beginning of the relationship, he showered her with gifts, with presents, with all sorts of things. So now she felt like, okay, this is the guy who's going to put me at a comfortable position in life. But it didn't work out that way, because once she got married to him, the money stopped, the gifts stopped, because now he didn't have to impress her anymore. And once they settled into the marriage, she realized she did not want to be there, because it's not all that it panned out to be. She married him for money. And let's face it, a lot of marriages, that's what the bottom line is, for money. A lot of people get married for the wrong reasons. Sometimes people don't get married for love. And I think that's one of the reasons people got to understand that love is self-love. That's what real love is, being able to love yourself and knowing that you're good enough and not to rely on somebody else to love you, because that's what happens. The woman married the man for his money. When it didn't pan out, she wanted a divorce. And in those instances, those very wives who just married for the sake of money, they want to ask for maintenance. They want to ask for child support. They want to ask for your asset. Because if a person who enters a marriage knowing their net worth, knowing that they're valuable, and don't have a prenuptial agreement, then in that case, you got to be very careful now how you move. Because if the one spouse is not working, and you take somebody that you know very well is incapable of being self-supporting, it's going to lead to problem. It's going to lead to you having to support that person. So if in another instance, once a person is self-supporting, the main problem that you have to look out for is how do you protect your assets? How do you rebut the presumption that something is marital assets? How do you cover your assets? How do you keep it safe from the spouse who came into the marriage with nothing and want to leave with something? You got to ask yourself, how do I protect myself from this? And I think one of the ways you protect yourself is, number one, getting yourself a good attorney who understands that that is just a presumption that it's marital asset. Once the parties never commingled assets together and they both maintain everything separate and distinct, and they just contributed towards the expenses in the home, whereas one spouse was investing, they're taking all their savings, they're pulling it into the household. The spouse who is doing the investment into the household, that is the spouse who walks away with virtually everything or most of it. And the one who was on the sideline, most likely the husband, running around and going, looking for the next best thing that passed and always think the grass is greener on the other side of the pasture. That's the person that is most likely to walk with the clothes on their back. And guys, I've seen this happen so many times. There was the most famous O'Brien and O'Brien case that most people who did matrimonial or divorce in law school would have been taught. And I think that's one of the most famous case you do when you're taking the bar exam. In the case of O'Brien and O'Brien, the family sacrificed. Mrs. O'Brien sacrificed to put Mr. O'Brien through medical school. He went through medical school, and when he got graduated, he started to work, and then he later opened a practice. Once he opened that practice and he got going and he started making a lot of money, he started looking at the other side of the pasture. It looked greener to him. So he started to get into a relationship with his own secretary. He got into a relationship with this younger woman, and then eventually he decided that he wanted to leave his home and he wanted to go. He did not want to be with his wife no more. She was no longer attractive. So what he did, he ran off with the secretary, and he did not want to share any portion of whatever he had, his assets, with his wife. And the law said, no, you've got to divide this asset. You're going to give your wife 50% of everything you have, because you know what? She was there. She sacrificed along with the children and everybody else to put you through medical school. So half of that license belongs to her. She sacrificed while you were going through medical school. She worked, she provided, she did everything possible. And it's not fair to her. The law said that she would have sacrificed all of this. And then once you start making money, you packed your bags and you ran through the door and you abandoned the family. So it doesn't necessarily work like that. And I've seen it in other instances where the wife was the one who abandoned the property. She abandoned the household. And well, that case was actually settled. She actually settled the case, and the husband ended up with all of his assets because he was the one investing in the home again, investing in his children, paying for his children's college education and everything else. Whereas the wife, she worked and she was just busy running around town and having a good time with various different people that she met. And fortunately, the law protects people from that type of bad conduct by a spouse, because people don't always make the right choices. But sometimes the law has the ability to help to secure you or protect you when you make bad choices in terms of who you seek out, and you are in the middle of a divorce, or you're in the process of going through a divorce, and you didn't forecast that you needed to protect yourself, protect your assets, and ensure that whatever comes your way, that you will be fine regardless. And guys, one of the things that people could consider is a trust. A trust is a good thing to consider before you even get married. If you put your assets into a trust before you get married, then that asset is untouchable. Even if the marriage doesn't last, you decide to divorce later on. So if I would encourage most people, if you have assets and you're thinking, okay, I want to get into this marriage, but you don't want to do a prenup because you don't think the person will be comfortable signing a prenuptial, Then the next best thing is to go get yourself a trust. Go get yourself, you could do a revocable living trust, or you could do an irrevocable trust. The irrevocable one cannot be revoked except in limited circumstances. And the revocable one, you could revoke it at any time during your lifetime, but chances are you're not going to revoke it, if especially if you get married and you created the trust prior to the marriage, and you created it for the sole purpose of protecting your assets before getting married to that person. That's a very good option to choose before, or even, you know, most likely just after you get married. Because if you protect the asset just after you get married, it's still protected, provided you do it like maybe within a month, 2 months, 3 months, because there's not much marital assets that could be going into a premarital property if you put it in a trust after you get married a couple of months down the road. But that's another method you can use to protect your assets during a divorce, a trust. Like I said before, the most important one, it would always be, the preference would always be before you marry, if the prenup is possible. If the prenup's not possible, then you do a trust and you protect your assets like that. The trust assigns a beneficiary, so somebody could be appointed as the beneficiary under the trust instrument, and then you can be one of the beneficiary. You make the trust to benefit yourself, and after you pass, it benefits your whoever else is entitled to your estate. Like if you have children from a prior marriage and you want to make sure that those children get your assets should anything happen to you. But you should never take a chance and enter into any marriage. Guys, there are people out there, I've seen so much in my practice, and I would tell people, just be careful with the people you choose. Be careful to protect your assets. Be careful to consider it. And if you were not careful, at least you can give my office a call and I'll help you sort it out. As you can see, the number there for you to reach my office is 718-877-3100. Consultation is, as usual, free 15 minutes. You'll get free 15 minutes consultation. In that time, we can discuss a host of the issues that you might be facing. But it's really important to protect your assets. And I want people to understand, when we speak about asset, it doesn't have to be that, because I do understand not a lot of people have millions of dollars in assets. But even if you have a house that you want to protect, a car that you want to protect, jewelry that you want to protect, all those things could be placed into a trust. And then once it's in a trust, it's really, to be honest, it's untouchable, because you can't get sued for something that's in a trust. And nobody could subject a trust to distribution during a marriage. The only way that can happen is if the parties got married, then they create a trust. Then in that trust, whatever is in that trust, then it would be subject to marital or equitable distribution. Because if the parties acquire the assets during the marriage, then they create a trust to protect their assets, then whatever assets is in that trust, it would belong to both parties. And even after a divorce, people can cause some sort of asset to remain in a trust. They don't have to take it out. They can just say, okay, we're going to just leave the asset in the trust, because we both going to be benefiting from it anyway. And then once the both of them pass, it goes to the children or whoever they choose to be the beneficiary of the remainder of the assets in the trust. So you guys need to consider these options. And as always speak to an attorney before you make any crazy decision. And for those people who are always getting married for immigration purposes, we know that this is prevalent. It's widely prevalent in the United States, where people just marry to get a green card. And in some instances, they go their separate ways. The spouse, most likely, if they're just married for a green card, both parties go their separate ways. But the problem is with the green card situation is, once the parties are ready to retire and they have retirement accounts, they're not going to be able to get the retirement account exclusive of the spouse, right? The spouse is entitled to some of that retirement fund. So what you usually have to do is to ensure that if you're going to stay with that person, if you're going to get your green card and you stay with that person, you need a separation agreement, right? The separation agreement is what's going to allow the pension administrator or your retirement accounts administrator to, give out your payments to you exclusive of your spouse. But if most times I would advise people, if you married for whatever the reason is, and I don't want to know, typically I don't ask people what was your reason for marrying. Was it for a green card? But if you know to yourself you married for a green card, as soon as you get that green card or that citizenship, whatever it is, you need to divorce. You need to ensure that you divorce, and don't keep the divorce running for years and years and years, because each year that you allow the divorce to run, that's time being vested on your assets for that spouse. And then it's going to put you, if the spouse said, oh, well, I want something now that I know you have assets, it's going to put you to task to go get an attorney and to fight your battles to ensure that whatever your assets were during the marriage, that you get all of it, because then you're going to have to argue that although the parties were married, they were never living together, they never commingled any assets, and their funds retained and remained its separateness. And that's how it was. And in that situation, then you'll be able to walk away with all your assets, not having to give the spouse anything. But it's going to cost you, because now you're going to have to pay legal fees if somebody decide that they're going to come after you for something that they never invested in, they never cared about. And they always say money changes people. Some people do anything for money. So a lot of the times, spouses that never invested into something, they want something when they're leaving rather than just walking and going in peace. Then is when they remember, oh, even though I didn't really put anything, I want something. So you have to be watchful for this type of behavior. Not that I'm saying that you should have gone into the marriage with bad faith or thinking that it's going to happen to you, but you just got to be cautious entering into any marriage whatsoever, because you don't even know what lies down the road. People change. And when people change, money also changes people. So it's just a way to be cautious of how you approach things when it comes to marriage. Doesn't matter how much you love someone, you should always be careful with how you go about your life. And as always, if you're confused, if you're in the process of going through a divorce, or if you're thinking about one, you're contemplating it, just give our office a call. 718-877-3100. Like I said before, consultation is free to you. Now, one caution I want to make to some of you who are contemplating the divorce, but you do have assets. I do understand a lot of times, for some people, like I've had a situation with a client. She had a property. She and the husband had a property. Neither of them could have afforded really to keep the property on their own. They'd only recently purchased the property, like maybe like 3 years prior to her coming to figure out whether or not she could divorce the husband. But the problem was they were both self-supporting, and she had no way of being able to pay that mortgage on her own. So her only possible option was to either sell the property, which they couldn't sell because there was a restriction on the deed. Some deeds restrict you from being able to sell the property before a certain time. And they had that type of restriction. They were unable to sell the property before, I think it was a 10-year period or something of the sort. And if that happens, then your best option is probably have the spouse either pay you for their interest, or in some cases, the parties could agree to keep the house for the 10 years, keep living in the property together, keep contributing to the property. And then once the 10 years expire, they could sign an agreement saying that the property will be sold at the end of that period that they're required to hold on to the property for. But you shouldn't allow a restriction on any of your assets to keep you in a bad relationship, a bad marriage, and feel guilty about it. And I think one of the things that plague people with being in bad marriages is religion. Religion tells you that you should never divorce, and a lot of people tend to hold on to that, and they stay in misery for the rest of their miserable life. Anyway, guys, thank you for joining me today. And I encourage you, if you need a divorce or you're thinking, contemplating, there's my number, 718-877-3100. Give me a call. The consultation is free. Our office is located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. Once again, thank you for joining today's edition of The Law and You. I am your host, Shellon Washington. Give me a call if you need consultation on your divorce or you're thinking about it. Thank you again, guys. Enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend and I hope you guys have a safe Memorial Day on Monday. Thank you, guys.